Everything is a business. The news networks need eyes because they need to pay salary. This has happened way before any of this was even being talked about. It's very simple. There is gold in the bank, and then there's money issued based on the worth of the gold in the bank. Everything needs to keep growing. Why? Because we need to be number one. So if we're not growing, we're dying. The claims on money are higher than they've ever been, and the money in the bank is not there. When a system is established and times keep moving, it is very hard to move it again. And then there are people that settle into the system and are proud that they learned how to use it. The people that are operating the plan were chosen at the moment and need to keep being there because they're the ones who set it and who know how it's going to end. That is the order in which countries rise, and it all boils down to the strong education of its people. If the prediction is taken seriously, then the people will act based on the prediction, and then the prediction will stop working. It's not that this is inevitable or that history repeats itself, it's because people keep doing the same things, that the same things keep happening. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The topic for this lecture is a little bit controversial, and it has to do a lot with what is happening right now. So I just warn you that if you want to click off, if you already read the title, then you're here because you want to be here. So let me start. We are going to be talking about the changing cycle of the last 100 years and about the changing world order. So this has to do primarily with the United States and China, but just so you know, this has happened way before any of this was even being talked about. As long as we've had records, because this has happened since the dawn of time. Since humanity was the Babylonians, Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, but just for modernity's sake, we're going to be focusing on United States and China. But this has happened with Holland and England, then England to United States, and as of current, the United States and China. So first, we are going to be grabbing some examples and some detailed data from this book. Like I've always said, they will be all in the description. This was a very extensive book, which goes into a lot of detail, and I'm not going to do that because then we would be here for 5 hours. So one of the first things that I want to put into the limelight, into the focus of the lecture, are the geopolitical elements, and in this case, also the local elements, when you can tell that something is happening. And that's when you're going to realize that the situation isn't as the news tell it to be. And that is something that I will be talking towards the end about the news. So here we go. When claims on hard money are introduced, at first there is the same number of claims on the hard money as there is hard money in the bank. It's very simple. There is gold in the bank, and then there's money issued based on the worth of the gold in the bank. Debt holders like it because they can lend these paper claims to the bank in exchange for an interest payment, so they get interest. The banks that borrow it from them like it because they can lend the money to others who pay a higher interest rate, so the banks make a profit. Those who borrow the money from the bank like it because it gives them buying power that they didn't have. And the whole society likes it because asset prices and productivity rise. And this is one of the things that happens everywhere, is that everything needs to keep growing. Why? Because we need to be number one. We always need to be number one. So if we're not growing, we're dying, which is a very big misconception that all nations have. And that is one of the very big problems, because now the claims on money are higher than they've ever been, and the money in the bank is not there. So that is one of the elements, local elements, that you can analyze to kind of see that something is happening. So now that we are on the same boat, I can keep talking about the cycles themselves. So this one relates primarily to China and their dynasties, but these can be extrapolated to other nations, and I'm going to place that transition right here so that you can understand China as well as how it happens to other countries. So this will be a quick review. The typical cycle begins with strong leaders who win control and implement improvements needed to build a great empire. These are the George Washingtons and Simon Bolívars of their time. Cycle 1. To be successful, an empire needs a smart and determined population that works well with each other. It also needs to be strong financially. These things are obtained by systems that train and produce people who have strong education and self-discipline. Getting the most capable people into the most important roles requires the meritocratic selection of people. It also requires an effective resource allocation system. During the period of peace and rising power, the empire typically works well economically and improves its financial condition. While the empire typically starts with limited financial resources and low debts because the previous empire's debts have been wiped out, in some cases it has assets that were acquired as an outcome of the prior war that it won. In the case of Chinese history, key variables were the distribution of land ownership and taxation of it. Often the arrival of a new dynasty weakened or overturned the corrupt elites of the prior system, vastly improving the resources available to the state. With these resources, the dynasty profits and expands. It builds commercial, technological, and military strengths that reinforce each other. For example, having strong technologies helps the dynasty economically and militarily because they can be used for both purposes and because being strong militarily protects the country's commercial interests. At its peak, the dynasty's government is functioning well, its resources and people are employed productively, and prior investments are yielding new gains. The economy is strong and self-sustaining, and the people are prosperous and produce great achievements in scholarship, the arts, trade, architecture, and other elements of great civilizations. The decline of the empire typically happens because the forces that strengthened it fade and a rival power emerges. Leadership weakens, often becomes corrupt, and or allows corruption in others. Also, the dynasty typically becomes overextended and quite often becomes heavily indebted, which is what I talked about before. The dynasty's population also becomes increasingly fragmented and loses its unity of purpose and ability to work well together. The wealth gap increases, which undermines productivity and leads to political conflict. Often there is some form of natural disaster, frequently a drought or a flood, that exacerbates the dynasty's problems. The more of these that happen at the same time, the greater the chance that the dynasty will fail. The fall itself comes with escalating rebellions and then a bloody civil war, stage 5 and stage 6. Eventually, a strong new leader emerges, wins the conflict, and begins the cycle again with a new dynasty. So stage 1, when the new order begins and the new leadership consolidates power, which leads to stage 2. When the resource allocation systems and government bureaucratics are built and refined, which if done well leads to stage 3, where there is peace and prosperity, which leads to stage 4. When there are greater excesses in spending and debt and the widening of wealth and political gaps, which leads to stage 5. When there are very bad financial conditions and intense conflict, which leads to stage 6. When there are civil wars or revolutions, which leads to stage 1, which leads to stage 2. So this is how it goes based on the example of China. Now we're going to get into some very interesting topics, which is what is required to understand this and why is it that people are so calm and you see them so relaxed even though we're at a turning point of the 100-year cycle. It is very simple. Because it is a 100-year cycle. I don't know about you, but the average human lifespan doesn't really reach till 100. So the people who saw a stage 6, stage 1 to stage 1, stage 2, sometimes even stage 3, are not alive. They're not here anymore. So the people that are currently facing this, your leaders, the people that literally are in charge of the whole nation, have never seen this before. Unless they've studied history, of course, but we know that that isn't really necessarily the case. What this requires is something that not many people do, and it is read your history, focus on the history, and then be able to transition into a modern period where you can see the same thing happening in the moment. Before I go on to explain some of the main reasons why China has done so well, and why the Americans are kind of falling off. First, I'm going to talk about their systems. So, democracy in the United States was a creation of the founding fathers based on the current moment of the times, based on the population, and based on who the leaders were. So what happens? I don't know if you know this, but there's still a remnant of those ages, and you can tell by the last names of American citizens. Baker, Taylor, Smith, and Weaver, to name a few. If you can't tell, those were professions from the past, because before, people were all just workers. John Smith is a very common name, as everybody knows. It comes from blacksmith, because the people of the time, they all had professions and they all worked. And the people who founded the system were all academics. They were all educated. And they formed a group of people that were actually became the leaders once the British were outed. And the population was smaller. So democracy was seen as something very viable because the people at the top who were elected were all educated, and the people were all hard workers who knew what they wanted, and the values of the hardworking class were actually present in the people because they were oppressed by the British, so they had to work. So their leaders came from knowing both circumstances. Now that is not the case. The thing is, when a system is established and times keep moving, it is very hard to move it again. And then there are people that settle into the system and are proud that they learned how to use it. So these people are those political leaders that you see with all these tax breaks and all these benefits that are using a system that was made for a population that is not, it was so much smaller compared to the population right now. And now all your bakers, all your tailors, and all your weavers are probably selling pictures of themselves online, are probably creating pyramid schemes, are not educated, and spend all their time on their phones. I don't like to make these suppositions, but if the founding fathers could see these, I'm pretty sure that they wouldn't recommend democracy. So that's all I'm going to say. So China is more focused on a Taoist approach and on Neo-Confucianism. But before we get to China, I just want to include a little snippet here of the book that talks about how Americans go by their politics and how Chinese go by their politics. So, whether they are interested or not, 300 years seems like a very long time ago to Americans, but for the Chinese, it isn't long at all. While the prospect of a revolution or a war that will overturn the US system is unimaginable to most Americans, both seem inevitable to the Chinese because they have seen those things happen again and again and have studied the patterns that inevitably precede them. While most Americans focus on particular events, especially those that are happening now, most Chinese leaders view current events in the context of larger, more evolutionary patterns. Americans are impulsive and tactical. They fight for what they want in the present. Most Chinese are strategic. They plan for how they can get what they want in the future. I have also found Chinese leaders to be much more philosophical, literally readers of philosophy, than American leaders. This isn't implied to say that they are better. It is just because of the times. Like I said, when it happened to England, it happened as well. The people came from the middle class, working class. They were academics as well, and they had the best of both worlds. In China, it's happening again because it's happened many times in the past. It is a very big privilege that China has over the US, and it is that they have like 5,000 years worth of history with peaks and slopes where they can just study everything and they can use all those tactics from their predecessors to do it over and over and over again. Chinese leaders don't just try to implement their plans, they set out clear metrics by which to judge their performance, and they achieve most of their goals because their plans are decade plans and they even have 100-year plans because they've seen it all before. This is something that the US doesn't do. Some of the things that they focus on is Confucianism, which seeks to bring about harmony by ensuring that people know their roles in the hierarchy and how to play them well. Legalism favors the rapid conquest and unification of everything under heaven by an autocratic leader. Legalism is basically the equivalent of a kind of fascism, like in Italy, but this is not fascism in China because I'm going to explain why. They handle like a fusion of ideologies. Taoism teaches that it is of paramount importance to live in harmony with the laws of nature. So I'm going to grab this book. There are some excerpts of Confucius that you can also check in the description. And this book is just so that you can get a taste of kind of what these values are and what is imprinted on Chinese citizens since they're young. So this is a duke asking Confucius about some advice. So Duke I asked, "What can I do in order to get the support of the common people?" Master Kung, who is Confucius, replied, "If you raise up the straight and set them on top of the crooked, the commoners will support you." The master said, "I do not see what use a man can be put to those whose words cannot be trusted. How can a wagon be made to go if it has no yoke bar, or a carriage if it has no collar bar? And hence we can foretell that the successors of Zhou will be like, even supposing they do not appear till 100 generations from now, based on studying what they are like now." The master said, "Just as to sacrifice to ancestors other than one's own is presumption, so to see what is right and not do it is cowardice." The master said, if a man has gifts as wonderful as those of the Duke of Chou, yet is arrogant and mean, all the rest is of no account. Do not enter a state that pursues dangerous courses, nor stay in one where the people have rebelled. When the way prevails in your land, this is about Taoism, count it a disgrace to be needy and obscure. When the way does not prevail in your land, then count it a disgrace to be rich and honored. The master said, impetu but tricky, ingenuous but dishonest, simple-minded but capable of breaking promises. To such men I can give no recognition. The master said, respect the young. How do you know that they will not one day be all that you are now? But if a man has reached 40 or 50 and nothing has been heard of him, then I grant there is no need to respect him. For those who approve but do not carry out, who are stirred but do not change, I can do nothing at all. The master said, first and foremost, be faithful to your superiors. Keep all promises, refuse the friendship of all who are not like you, and if you have made a mistake, do not be afraid of admitting the fact and amending your ways. Based on this, you can kind of tell right now how the Chinese are wired. And there is also the Neo part of Confucianism, which talks about something that Confucius struggled a lot in his time. And it is that he was always an advisor because he couldn't be a ruler, because ruling came from families and dynasties about sons and daughters and marriages and all this kind of stuff, which is something that the Chinese eliminated so they could make everything more about meritocracy. But they did keep the imperial system of exams to make sure that the people that ruled the country were people that were worthy of the title. Their cabinet is not held to a certain year's length. So one of the things that happens as you see the propaganda wars, which is another big thing, is that the Chinese, when they see that a year cycle is being complete, they always try to hold the position of the cabinet for a little longer than 4 years. So I think that the last time they announced it was like 12. And then depending on what they need, it keeps going. Why? Because they have a plan set up and the people that are operating the plan were chosen at the moment and need to keep being there because they're the ones who set it and who know how it's going to end. That is the reason why terms are so useless in this moment, because 40 years or even 8 years is very little time to be able to implement something successfully. So the Chinese know that they have to keep this in check and they have to lengthen the times so that these people can actually get the job done. And that is something that Americans don't understand, and the news make a worse job of it because what do they say? They say, look at the Chinese and how they are having their freedom taken away from them. Because look how they're extending the terms, this isn't democratic. That's the propaganda that they give you, when in reality there is always a basis for what they do, as of the moment. So, regarding the rest of this topic, there is something that it always boils down to if you ask, what is the cause of something? Enough times. What is this, like this war, quote unquote, about geopolitics, about technology, about the markets, positioning, ownership, world dominance. It all comes down to the war with ourselves, which is one of the final chapters of this book. What does it have to do? If you remove the people, everything just kind of goes into an orderly fashion and nature takes over, because all problems are in a certain way human. So based on that, I'm going to just talk about the points that are given here by the author relating to this. Let's review the specific items that help make a great empire. They are leadership that is strong enough and capable enough to provide the essential ingredients for success, which include strong education. By strong education, I don't just mean teaching knowledge and skills. I also mean teaching strong character, civility, and strong work ethic, which are typically taught in the family as well as in school. These lead to improved civility that is reflected in factors such as low corruption and high respect for rules, such as the rule of law. People being able to work well together, united behind a common view of how they should be together, is also important when people have knowledge, skills, good character, and the civility to behave and work well together. And there is A good system for allocating resources which is significantly improved by being open to the best global thinking. The country has the most important ingredients in order to succeed. That leads to it gaining greater competitiveness in global markets, which brings in revenues that are greater than expenses, which leads the country to have strong income growth, which allows it to make increased investments that improve infrastructure, education, and research and development, which lead it to have rapidly increasing productivity, new technologies, which are valuable for both commerce and the military. A rising and significant share of world trade, which requires it to have a strong military to protect its trade routes and to influence those who are important to them outside their borders in becoming economically permanent. The country develops strong and widely used currency, equity, and credit markets, their currency becoming a reserve currency, at least one of the world's leading financial centers. That is the order in which countries rise, and it all boils down to the strong education of its people. Why isn't this apparent enough? You have to analyze the moment that the education starts to drop, and the education level of most people is not that high. It takes a while for this to affect the later causes, the third rate, fourth rate, and fifth rate consequences, which is innovation, trade, and all this stuff. But once that happens, it starts becoming heavily apparent when other technologies start taking over the markets, which is something that you've seen coming from China. So, based on everything that I've talked about here, predictions. So, something that you need to know is that I don't make predictions because I think that they are useless, because if the prediction is taken seriously, then the people will act based on the prediction, and then the prediction will stop working because the prediction was made before the event, and now the same prediction is affecting the outcome, so it's going to be different. And then you're going to get another author who writes about why the prediction was wrong, and then you get even more garbage that comes into your head. So stop listening to those things and just focus on what is happening in the moment, because that is what can help you navigate this and change the variables so that the outcome can be what you want. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, history, those who don't learn their history tend to repeat it. And I also add to that, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. But what I like to say to people is a little bit different, and it is very simple. It's not that this is inevitable or that history repeats itself. It's because people keep doing the same things that the same things keep happening. It is that simple. They don't learn their history and they don't change, so the same things keep happening. So what do I want to do? In this case, is I want to give you an actionable solution to this. And I'm going to give you an exercise. The result of this exercise is very simple. Your mission is to watch one outlet of the news in a specific day and not feel any type of conflict arising within you. It sounds simple, but it is not very simple, because I'll tell you what, everything is, in this case, I'm going to explain like this. Everything is a business. The news networks need eyes because they need to pay salaries and they need to extend their business. That's how it works. So what are they going to do? They're going to use fear-mongering tactics so that they get you to see, and they're going to bring in people, not because they're experts, but because they're going to get you to see, to watch it. Even if you're just going to watch it to see some idiot who doesn't know what he's talking about, just rant and rave about something that you don't like, because that will get you mad and you will get even more eyes. And that pays. So what are you going to do? You are going to write down certain world events that are happening that make you worried, and you're going to keep that list for like 3 months. And then you're going to write a result after 3 months about how that affected you. I can give you a spoiler that it's probably not going to be very apparent, usually. If you don't like that about the news, I can give you another one. You just have to grab certain things that are making you stressed right now and write them down. It can go to 15, depending on how much proof you need. Some people just need 15, other people need 30. It keeps increasing. So write them down and then wait for them to conclude. There's always a resolution. And after the resolution, tell me how many of those ended your life or caused incredible misery where you can't come back from. And my guess is 0, because that's always how it goes. So that will be your exercise. That will be your final thing. And before we finish the lecture, let me check. Yeah, I want to leave you with some final wisdom from Confucius, because I think that we could learn a lot about his ancient teachings. The master said, "The gentleman calls attention to the good points in others. He does not call attention to their defects. The small man does just the reverse of this." Master Kung, Chai Kangzu asked Master Kung about the art of ruling. Master Kung said, "Ruling is straightening. If you lead along a straight way, who will dare go by a crooked one?" This is leading by example. Master Kung replied saying, "If only you were free from desire, they would not steal even if you paid them." The work first, the reward afterwards. Is not that piling up moral force? Attack the evil that is within yourself. Do not attack the evil that is in others. Is not this repairing shortcomings? Because of a morning's blind rage to forget one's own safety and even endanger one's kith and kin, is that not a case of divided mind? Fan Chi asked about the good ruler. The master said, "He loves men." He asked about the wise ruler. The master said, "He knows men." Fan Chi did not quite understand. The master said, "By raising the straight and putting them on top of the crooked, he can make the crooked straight." So, like I said, it all boils down to you as the individual. If you as an individual go by the right way, society will follow. If this video spoke to your soul, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Share it with anyone that you believe might benefit from this, and if you want more content, follow me on my other socials that are down in the description, where I go into more depth on divine topics.